Hello, everyone, and welcome to a post-election edition of these special presentations that have been brought to you through the California Portuguese-American Coalition, with, of course, the partnership of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute from California State University at Fresno. And, of course, both of these institutions have grants from the Luso-American Development Foundation, FLAD, in Lisbon. And all throughout the day, election day in Portugal, which was this last Sunday, the 30th of January, the California Portuguese-American Coalition and the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute from Fresno State had an amalgam of reporting that was put forth throughout various times of the day. And of course, we also had a wonderful presentation that we were glad to host at kind of at the end of the day for the East Coast of the United States of America, still middle afternoon here in California, which was a wrap-up session, a 1 hour and 5 minute session, a fascinating conversation with Senator Dan DePonte, the former Senator Dan DePonte from the great state of Rhode Island, state senator for many years, representing, of course, that whole entire area of Providence, and a very, very proud Portuguese American. So today we thought we would come to you and bring you a wrap-up. Wrap-up 2.0, let's put it that way, to give you some perspective of what happened. The election results are in. When we had our wrap up yesterday with Dan DePonte, we were about an hour and a half away from the full election results, although we already had some very concrete results. And as you can see, these are the results that we will be talking about for a little bit today. This is directly from the newspaper O Observador, and we want to thank them for allowing us to share this with those in the Portuguese-American community throughout the United States of America. So thanks to all of you joining us live here on Facebook through the various pages and groups that are broadcasting this live. We will also have this up as an archive on YouTube, so you can listen to it anytime and get information about it as well. So as we reported yesterday, and as Dan and I discussed at the end of our presentations from the California Portuguese-American Coalition and the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI and CPAC, the PS, the Socialist Party, that had been ruling Portugal with a coalition to the left, with the left bloc and the Portuguese Communist Party. It was a parliamentary agreement, so both of these other parties did not have a seat in the government. The government was ran by the PS, and there was a parliamentary agreement that was done 6 years ago, and it was renewed after the 2019 legislative elections. And it was actually coined, I should say, as geringonça, Portuguese word that became very, very popular at that time, meaning kind of a loose agreement, and it was a parliamentary agreement. So both the left bloc and the CDU, which is the coalition of the parties to the left with the led by the Portuguese Communist Party, they did not have seats in the government, but they approved the budget and they approved legislation that was put forth by the PS. As I mentioned in last year, the end of last year, they weren't able to agree on the budget. So the president of Portugal called for snap elections, as the European press put it. It's a good way to put it. And so the elections were held on January the 30th. These are the final results, and I'll start here to my left here with the folks that did not vote. So 42% of the registered voters did not show up at the polls, and that is below the expectations. At the beginning of the coverage by RTP and some of the other television stations, some of the other private stations, RTP being the public station in Portugal, It was announced, according to some of the polling done by the Catholic University for RTP, that the number of folks, the percentage of folks staying home would be between 49 and 54. And obviously, 49 was alarming and 54 was really alarming because that meant only 46% of the people would have voted. It was a little bit more, quite a bit more, actually. So it was 42%. And if you compare it to 2019, that's a drop of 3.5%, which is good. That means that more people participated, even though we were in the middle of a pandemic. So that is a very, very important point to remember when analyzing the elections. Right now, 100% of the freguesias, of the townships, have been counted. There are 4 deputies still to be elected out of the 230. There are 226 elected. 4 are still to be elected to the national parliament, and those are the 4 representing the immigration districts. Okay, so there are 2 districts. One is called the European district, and the other one is called Fora da Europa, outside of Europe district. And so between both of those, they elect 4 different deputies to represent the communities in the parliament. And those 4 will not be known for about 2 weeks from now. But even without those 4, the PS has a majority. Even if those 4 went to the PSD, which that's not very likely, more than what we think will be the outcome of it, more likely than not, I should say, it is that it'll probably be a 2 and 2. A 2 divided to the PS and 2 divided to the PSD. At least that's how it's now. It may tend one way or another, but a little bit. But most folks who have been analyzing the elections think that it might be that way. But even if the PSD got 3 and the PS only 1, the PS already has a majority to rule, because there are 230 deputies in the parliament. And so basically you need 116. The PS already has 117. If they pick up 1 or 2, if they pick up 1, they'll have 118. If they pick up 2, 119, a very comfortable majority in the parliament. So the way the parliamentary system is in Portugal, basically with a little over 40%, you can have a majority of the votes. And that's exactly what happened. The PS picked up 41.7% of the votes. They were able to pick up 117 seats in parliament. The PSD, and I should go back and say the PS is a center-left party, and the PSD is a center-right party. And the polls were very wrong. As a matter of fact, the polls about 3 to 4 days before the election were saying that the PSD was very, very close. Some polls said they were neck to neck with the PS. Some polls said that the PS was in favor, but only by 3 to 4 points at the most, which is almost within the margin of error. So anything could happen. Well, about 45 to 60 days ago, the PS was leading with about 9 to 10%. And indeed, they picked up quite a few seats, and they ended up actually going over those projections. So as you can see, they got 41.7, almost 42%, and the PSD got 27.8, almost 28%. So there's basically a 13-point margin, and that is really a wonderful margin for Portugal. And so for Portugal, and when I mean for Portugal, because it'll have some stability independently of where one is on the political spectrum, it does give stability to the government. And so for the Portuguese people, indeed, the PS can govern with a very clear mandate when they were able to beat the nearest party by 13 points. And then in third place, and this was a surprise and not a surprise, it was that had been talked about, especially by the press. The press gave lots of opportunities for the Chega to shine. And the Chega is a very right-wing, dangerous party in Portugal. And the Chega received 0.2% of the vote. They now have 12 deputies, and they only had one. So that was a tremendous increase. They are the third biggest parliamentary representation. But as you can see, a big difference between them and the second, and a big difference between them and the PS. But still 7.2%. It is not the 15% that the leader André Ventura got during the presidential election. Some of the press thought that the Shiga would get close to that. They didn't even get half of that, but they were able to grow and grow by leaps and bounds. They, of course, did not. They thought they were going to get enough. They thought that they probably would get over 10 to 11%, and they thought the PS they might get to 35%. That some people thought that it would happen, and between both of them, they would be able to do a coalition. That, of course, did not happen. And the Iniciativa Liberal, which is a new party, also started and basically got elected in 2019 with just a few votes and a representative in the parliament. It now has 5%. It became the fourth largest political force in Portugal, and it was able to elect 8 seats in the House. The Bloco de Esquerda, the left bloc that was in a parliamentary agreement with the PS in the last 2 governments, and voted against the new budget, and thus provoked a crisis, and thus provoked, of course, I'm not saying it's the fault of the Bloco de Esquerda, the CDU, but by not voting for the parliament for the budget in this parliamentary accord, of course, the government was not able to function, and so they were severely penalized, and they are down to 5 seats in parliament. The CDU, the Portuguese Communist Coalition, is down to 6. They got 4.4% of the vote. The CDS, which is a historic right conservative party, but Christian Democrats with a strong history in Portugal, right from the day that Portugal began elections after the revolution of 1974, they don't have any representation in parliament. They only got 1.6% of the vote. In past elections, they've gotten as much as 6, 7, and some even as high as around 10%. And then the PAN, a left-leaning party favoring animal rights, got 1.5%, and that 1.5% basically is a good number. That 1.5% gave him the continuation of 1, basically. And the Livre, which is also a left-leaning party, got 1.3% and also 1% in parliament. Now, if you compare that to 2019, and let's do a little bit of comparison. So if you look at that, the party that actually grew the most was the Shiga by 5.9, almost 6%. As I mentioned, I mean, they went from 1 deputy to 12 in the parliament, from 1 seat to 12 seats. The PS grew by 5. The Iniciativa Liberal, also right-wing party, went ahead and got a percentage of 3.7, so grew by 3.7. And the ones that lost were the next 4 parties. The PSD lost 0.1%. The CDU, the communists, lost 2%, 2.1%. The CDS, the right-wing Christian Democrats, lost 2.6%. Basically, so in other words, they were up to almost 5% last time. They're down to 1.6 and no representation in parliament. And the biggest loss, of course, was the Bloco de Esquerda, the left bloc, that lost 5.2%. They now have 4.5. They used to be the third most voted political force in Portugal. They used to have almost 10%. They are down to, as I mentioned, to 4.5%. So they really took a beating. The president's Secretary General of the PS, I should say. The president is Carlos Cesar, who used to be the president of the governor of the Azores. The Secretary General of the PS, who will be the next prime minister again, is Antonio Costa. And Antonio Costa had asked, and especially within the last 3 weeks of the campaign, he asked the left-leaning folks in Portugal to make their vote useful. That was his term. We need to have useful votes, and a vote in the PS is a useful vote. And he did not even ask for a majority. He asked for a comfortable governing number that might allow him to govern with maybe one left-leaning political force. But he got a very, very comfortable majority. As I said, 117 deputies right now. If he gets 2 from immigration, it will be 119. And so if we look a little bit at all of Portugal, the PS won in lots of the different districts. So if you look up here in the north, in the Bragança area, the PS won. If you look in Vila Real, PS won again. Braga, PS again. Porto, PS. Just about everywhere. PS 39% in Aveiro, which was a strong lead. 51% in Viseu. 45% in Guarda, down to a little bit to Coimbra. The PS kept a 45%, down to Leiria. The PS was at 35%. Castelo Branco, 47, almost half of the votes there. In Santarém, 41%. In Lisbon, 40%. So a very, very comfortable lead in 40% after the PS lost the city hall to the PSD just recently. In Santarém, I have already mentioned. In Porto Alegre, 47, almost half of the votes. In Évora, 43. These were strong CDU, Portuguese Communist Party strongholds. Setúbal, the PS got 45%. In Beja, 43%. And down in Faro district, the PS got 39%. So as you can see, they took strong leads and strong percentages in all throughout Portugal. Now, if we look at the archipelagos that belong to Portugal. And let's start with the Azores, where most Californians who identify as being of Portuguese background can trace their roots to the Azores, as we all know. If we look at the different districts in the island of Santa Maria, Vila do Porto, the PS was able to get 52%, a clear majority of the votes. And Ribeira Grande and São Miguel, the PS got 41%. In Ponta Delgada, 39%, and in Vila Franca do Campo, 46, almost half, and in Povoação, 51%, and in Nordeste, 42%. Overall, the PS took over and got most of the votes in all of São Miguel, it seems like. In the island of Terceira, it's also pink. Pink is the PS color, as you can see. Orange is the PSD color. And in Praia da Vitória, the PS was able to get 42.6%. Again, a very strong showing, considering that they lost the city hall to the rival PSD. And in Angra do Heroísmo, which has a sister city here in Central California, in Tulare, Angra do Heroísmo, it was able to get 43.6%. If we go to the island of São Jorge in Calheta, 41.9%, and in Velas also in the 41%. If we go to Pico, the beautiful island of Pico also in São Roque, they were able to get 45% of the vote. In Lages, almost half, 47.6%. And in Madalena, 42%. So the island of Pico pretty much voted overwhelmingly to the PS for these elections. If we go to Fayal, the island of Fayal in Horta, the PSD won there with 40% of the vote. It was the only island that the PSD won a majority. And if you go into Santa Cruz das Flores, you have the PS with 50%, and the other area of Flores, Lages Flores, the PS with 42%. So pretty much an overall win in the Azores, a very, very strong showing after just in 2020. So less than 2 years ago, October of 2020, the PS actually won the elections, but not enough to make a coalition with the left-leaning parties. The right-leaning parties, along with this PSD, were able to form a coalition and get the PS out of power. If we look at the islands of Madeira and Porto Santo, in Porto Santo, the PSD were the winners with 40%. And in Madeira, you see it's all orange except one area, Machico, where the PS won with almost half of the vote, 49.4%. Everywhere else was the PSD with 47, 38, 46, 46, 46 again. 59 in Calheta of Madeira, 46 in Porta do Sol, 46 in Ribeira Brava, and 28% that was divided quite, but by different forces, but they still won by 28% in Santa Cruz. And so that's a little bit of the map of all of Portugal to give you a little bit of the information and a panorama of what happened in the elections in Portugal. So if we look here on this side where it says deputados, okay, that's the deputies or the what we call here congressmen. You have 117 for the PS, so they grew by 11. And if they pick up 2 in immigration, they'll have, as I said, 119. The PSD had now have 71, so they lost 6. And the Chega, okay, now have 12. They picked up 11. The Iniciativa Liberal now have 8, so they picked up 7. The CDU, the Portuguese Communist Coalition, have 6, so they lost 6. The Bloco de Esquerda has 5, they lost 14 deputies. There was a coalition, PPD, PSD, and CDS, this coalition picked up 3 and 2. And then if you have the PAN, they used to have 3, now they have 1. And so if we look at the overall vote, and from a purely not a political aspect, but it's political in the aspect that it's political parties, but I'm here just analyzing it. If you look at it and you see the PS with 41.7, so basically 42% of the vote. And then let's look at all the other left-leaning parties. You have Bloco de Esquerda with 4.5. You have the CDU, the Portuguese Communist Coalition, with 4.4. You have the PAN with 1.5, and you have the Livre with 1.3. So if you add those up, okay, basically around 3 points there, around 4.5 there at 7.5, around 4.5 there, so 7.5, that's 8, that's 12. If you add that to the PS is 42, basically a little over or a bit over 54%, almost 55% of Portugal voted left-leaning. Okay, where the others voted about 44 to 45% total voted right-leaning. But there's a lot of uncertainty with some of the parties, especially the Chega. The Chega is a very nationalistic, ultra right-wing party. There has been plenty of writing this morning from the political pundits saying that Rui Rio, who was the president of the PSD, dug his own grave, as one put it, because in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, he said he would be willing to do what is happening in the Azores, which would be a coalition with the Chega. And the political pundits believe that he was severely penalized for saying that, especially from his center coalition. So it's the PSD is a center-right party. Those leaning a little bit more to the center and not to the right, people think that they did not vote or they went to vote for the PS. Because of being really afraid of what Chega represents. Chega is a very racist, a very fanatic, a very nationalistic party, and Portugal, of course, has a past of almost 50 years of fascist regime and a dictatorship, and so the folks are quite afraid, although they've been playing by, of course, the democratic rules, and they were able to get 7.2% of the vote. So I believe that gives everyone an overall view of how the Portuguese elections turned out. A clear majority for António Costa, who has been ruling Portugal, who has been the prime minister for the last 6 years. So Portugal has a parliamentary system. So the day-to-day running of the government is up to the prime minister. The president, of course, has certain powers, the armed forces and other powers, and he has a right to also to dissolve parliament, but only if there is the need to do that. He can't just wake up in the morning and say, okay, well, everyone voted this way, but I'm going to dissolve parliament. Indeed, there are procedures, and there is the constitution that allows the president the power to dissolve within special circumstances, as it happened a few months ago because a budget could not be passed. So Antonio Costa now has a 4-year mandate, a 4-year mandate with a majority from his own party. He can even pass legislation, and even if one or two of his deputies decides not to vote for it, which in Portugal that doesn't happen. It's a total different system than the United States, and so pretty much it's a unitary system. So folks pretty much fall into that category of wherever they fall in the political spectrum and by whatever party they are elected. But if something did happen for one reason or another, and if he gets 2 deputies from immigration from the diaspora with 119, he basically needs 116 to pass a budget and to pass any other legislation that is in the realm of the government. There are some things that have to be done with the 2/3, constitutional amendments and things like that, and of course with that he would need a coalition with a PSD, with the center to center right party. So a little bit on that, actually quite a bit, probably more than you bargained for, but we thought it was important to bring this to you since the California Portuguese-American Coalition, along with the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute from Fresno State, put forth a full day. Basically, we began at 9 o'clock in the morning and continued until about 5 o'clock in the afternoon with different bits and pieces of information, featuring posts from the European press, featuring some live feeds on both of our Facebook pages and on other venues that allowed us to do it as well. And so that is a post-election report here from the California Portuguese Coalition with the assistance of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI from Fresno State. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for taking time, and thank you all for still continuing, those of you who are of Portuguese background, 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation, for continuing to be interested in the world of politics and the world of the Portuguese government, because obviously politics affects all of us. And the PS that has been ruling Portugal and the policies that it has been were put forth in the last 6 years will be basically the policies that will be put forth for the next 4 years. There are some very interesting, and who knows, of course, what is happening with the pandemic. They've been handling that for the last 2 years, as we know. And there are funds coming in 2026 from the European Union. There are funds coming every year, and so there are important decisions to be made economically and culturally for Portugal, certainly in the next 2 to 4 years. And Antonio Costa will be able to do that with his party without having to consult a coalition, although he did say last night in his acceptance speech that this is a majority that wants to dialogue with parties of both the center and the left and the right. He said he is open to dialogue with all parties, but he was very, very adamant that he would not have dialogue with the Shiga. He will consult all parties except the ultra-right nationalistic racist Shiga. That he was very, very adamant about that, and that is what he said. So whether he will dialogue with the Shiga or not, we will see. But he made that commitment in his acceptance speech yesterday, as he, of course, won the parliamentary majority, which is the first time for the PS in quite a few years. I believe it was the last time they won a majority like this was in around 2005. So indeed, it will be interesting to see how the next 4 years are. Portugal has some, with the pandemic especially, there are some challenges in the healthcare. Portugal has a national healthcare plan a national healthcare system where every single Portuguese gets healthcare from the government. There are some private things also the folks can pay for. There are private clinics, but there is a national healthcare system. There was some question if that was going to continue or not, but the PS seems to be very, very committed to it. There is also, of course, the issues dealing with education and with cultural issues and with economic issues as well. So quite interesting times for the next 4 years with the majority of the PS, the Portuguese Socialist Party, and a center-left leaning party in Portugal that won the majority with 117. Probably it will be either 118 or 119, maybe even if they were able to pick up 3 out of 4, 120, but who knows? We'll see. We will have the results from those who voted in the election through the mail, as those of us here in California are Portuguese citizens and decided to vote. Those votes will not be tallied for another couple of weeks. So here in about 2 weeks to 2.5, we'll have those results as well. Again, on behalf of the California Portuguese-American Coalition, CPAC, and PBBI, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute from Fresno State, we thank you for being in tune with us, and hopefully you enjoyed this wrap up of the Portuguese elections, general elections for 2022. Take care, everyone.